Hello and welcome to 001 Radio Games Club. Today, we're tackling The Last of Us Part 2, Part 1. I'm your host, Ryan, and I am joined by, as usual, with Wyatt. And
That's my name.
We've got a special guest this week. We've got Jake.
Ooh, special guest. Hello.
Yeah, it's
I'll
very
take that card.
unique. We're important people, okay? And we have very important guests, aka people that we know. So we are splitting this discussion into two videos. So this video is going to be focused, podcasts. This podcast will be very focused on the critical reception and reviews. We're going to do a second portion, probably in around a week, which will be focused on our personal opinions and our takeaways and like what we generally think of the game. We're still going to mention a lot of that stuff here, but we're not going to go into detail. Mostly because we really want to talk about everything that's going on with the user and the critic reviews while it's still fresh in everyone's minds. It's been a big topic for the past couple weeks.
Yeah, we want to stay objective here, right?
Yep.
Yeah, and I definitely think there's so much to talk about just from the leaks and the reception before the game even came out alone that you wouldn't be able to fit it in 2 episodes without having to go for like 2 or 3 hours, I feel like.
Yeah, I think it definitely works well to split the discussion on things that are not the game itself to here, and then do our like story analysis and everything later.
Sure.
But we do a thing at the start of these podcasts. See, the last Games Club we did, I lied. We did the game at the end because I forgot about it. We didn't do the game at the end because I intended to put it at the end. So this week we're correcting that, and we have a news game. Jake, you haven't been in the podcast before, but I'm sure you're familiar with the concept of podcast games. So I'm going to give you a couple of quotes about The Last of Us Part 2. And what I want you to do is try and match them to one of 3 reviewers. So the reviewers we have for this are Kotaku, Polygon, and Eurogamer.
Okay.
All right?
Oh boy.
Okay.
So I'm going to give you a quote. This is from, for anyone wondering where I'm getting these, it is from the summaries of the reviews from the Reddit review mega thread. So these are out of context. Also, big warning right now. Massive spoilers for The Last of Us Part 2.
Oh yeah.
And probably Part 1.
I don't know how you can talk about this game
Part 1, we've already spoiled Part 1 in the previous podcast, so
yeah,
we're going to spoil it again.
Just in case you didn't watch that, that episode, everything's getting spoiled rotten. There's nothing left.
That's your last warning. Okay, that's your final warning.
I don't know how you made it this far without getting spoiled yet.
Yeah, I would be impressed. So speaking of spoiling The Last of Us Part 2, we have our first quote is, like the nature of consuming Seattle or the outbreak consuming humanity, its ugliness overshadowed everything else.
Is that about the game?
It is about the game. It is from. It is a review from either Kotaku, Polygon, or Eurogamer.
You're not just talking about Seattle in general.
Yeah. Or I thought I was just talking about like the game is just bad in general. I'm like, wow. Okay.
Damn.
Okay. That might go. I think that's gonna go to Kotaku right there.
Okay, we got to vote for Kotaku.
Yeah.
What is it? We have Polygon, Kotaku, and a Eurogamer. Okay.
Yep.
I'm gonna go with Eurogamer.
That's a fair one too.
So our second quote, and I'll let you know who got these correct at the end, just so we don't eliminate choices. Can a slick mainstream action game really reckon with the violence that drives it? The answer is yes, messily, but powerfully.
Okay, that's definitely Polygon.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah, I have to second that.
Agreed on Polygon. All right. So our final quote. Its characters are surviving, but they're not learning, and they're certainly not making anything better.
What was the last one? I guess Eurogamer for the last other one, so I guess Kotaku for this one.
Okay. Yeah, I guess Eurogamer, but dang, they're all so different, but also like you can't pin them yet.
Yeah.
Yeah. So a reason I chose this is because all 3 of these reviews are unscored, so they're not doing just numbers. Although Eurogamer does give it a rating, they give it an essential rating. So the first quote I gave you was Kotaku, actually. So
okay.
Jake got it right.
Wow.
I did not. The second was Eurogamer.
Oh my god!
Polygon, and Polygon was the third.
So I failed horribly.
Yep.
And I still got an F, but I'll take.
You
I'll take
got
that
1 point. You got a third. That's enough to survive. We can't all be winners. And speaking of not being all winners, we have to talk about The Last of Us Part 2.
Damn.
For a game that seemed like such a winner, like everybody was talking about it like crazy, and then in 2 weeks, it just shit hit the fan.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever seen public opinion of like an upcoming game turn around quite as quickly. Like I've never seen anything like it, because typically it's like, okay, well that was a weird first trailer, and then like a weird second trailer comes out, and then people aren't on board. But this was like immediate. As soon as the leaks hit, it was just like a complete 180. I've never seen anything like it before.
I will give an update here. So as of now, the Metacritic review user score is up to a mixed rating and not purely negative. So it's not as polarized as it had been a little while ago.
Oh, so the people who actually played the game are actually giving that's weird.
Yeah,
I think that was probably the hardest thing, is like within the first 4 hours, the reviews are at 40% or something.
Which is impossible. Like there's no way you can play this game in 4 hours. It is impossible.
I mean, this is where I think we have to mention our first major spoiler. One of the first events that happens in the game is that Joel, sometimes you can't always hit par, and golf's a difficult game. All right.
Jesus Christ.
Abby, she kind of hit a hole in one.
I don't know. That was like a hole in fucking 40. I don't. That was a lot of swings.
Jesus Christ.
Like she was trying to get the ball out of the sand.
Yeah, that's sand trap.
Yeah, Joel was really on his back nine right there.
Yep. All right.
Okay, we can stop.
The golf puns are gonna get crazy. Yeah, so Joel gets hit with a golf club.
A few
and
times.
is dead. Yeah, just a couple of times. Kind of in front of Ellie, and people were pretty mad about that. Especially users.
Here's the thing. It's important to distinguish the people that are mad just because Joel died, because those people are out there. They exist. And it's also important that there are people who don't mind that Joel died. It's more how it happened. And it's really important to like make that definition there.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I would also want to say, like, this came out in the leak. This is, I think, the one decisive thing that really changed the sway of everybody's opinion in that leak. But the thing about the leak is it didn't really break it in like Naughty Dog broke it in, and they didn't tell the story the same way. So like that, I think that also really hurt. Is like that's the first thing you hear about this game is that Joel dies. Your immediate response is this thing fucking sucks. Like there's no.
Go ahead. Sorry.
No. You go ahead. What?
It's weird to me because I didn't. So to clarify, I didn't read a single leak up until I played the game. Like I was so like every time I'd go into a comment section or any kind of website, I would like inch down just to make sure I wasn't reading anything. Like I was so careful because I hate spoilers of any kind. So I was so incredibly careful. Like I avoided comment sections. I avoided a lot of like Reddit and stuff like that just so that it wasn't spoiled to me, because I wanted to go into it as like clueless as possible. And looking back at it now, because now I'm looking at everyone's reactions to when the leaks first came out and stuff, and it's like I feel like, and this is just people reacting to the leaks, not the actual game, that's different, but it's so weird to me that people would get so pissed off because I think everyone expected Joel was going to die in the sequel. Like I don't think that was ever out of the question for a single second. And B, you can't judge a story based off of the cliff notes of what we got.
Yeah,
what we got was a cliff notes version of the full story, and getting pissed off over that and canceling your pre-order is absolutely ridiculous to me.
Yeah. I mean, I think for some people it's an issue of the story they really wanted to see was more Joel and Ellie, because that relationship was such a huge aspect of the first game that people loved. And I feel like for some people that is like a valid reason to not buy the game if that's what you wanted and you're not getting that as a consumer. I think that's a valid reason to not buy it. And I think part 2 is in a very unique position where it's a game that, having experienced the whole thing, I am glad that I did, but this isn't a game I think I ever want to go back and play. Like, this isn't the type of thing I think people have fun with. It's a very exhausting game.
You could be quoting the designer right there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was their goal, I think, from the start, is like, this game is not fun. This is telling a story. And you can say that's a good choice or a bad choice, but like, I don't think I think that's objective at this point. Like, this game is really trying to sell this dark image.
Sure,
Yeah.
but to be honest, it's such a weird thing that, because Neil Druckmann, that's a quote from Neil Druckmann, right? It's such a weird thing that he would say that, of all people, because they've crafted such a good like core gameplay loop, and even when the story wasn't always 100% like, grabbing me, the gameplay was always there to like scoop me back up, because I thought it was great. And so this game is fun. It's when the story comes in that it makes you absolutely depressed.
Yeah, it's when the story tries to guilt trip you for killing all those people, but killing people is the gameplay loop, and the gameplay loop is fun. So you want to kill those people because it's fun, but at the same time you feel bad for killing those people because the game makes you feel bad about killing those people.
Sure. I mean, and we'll probably get more into that in the second episode, or the part 2.
Absolutely.
Part 2. But it's so weird to like just to have the director label it as not fun, when looking at it from like the designer's perspective and everyone else's perspective, they're like, what the fuck? Of course it's trying to be fun. Like, we're trying to make a gameplay loop that people want to come back to. And especially like the environments that they made. I'm not trying to get into that part 2, but they've crafted the environments in a way where you can replay it. Like, there's plenty of alternate paths to take and things like that. So it's weird. Like, I definitely get emotionally. It's a game that you like. That's very exhausting. I mean, I felt like I had finished a marathon when I finally finished it, for a lot of different reasons.
And that also sounds like a bit like the what? Oh my God, what's the girl's name that you play as after Ellie?
Abby.
Yeah, Abby. Wow, I can't believe I forgot that. But yeah, like, making you play as her seemed like the next like hardest thing, is they didn't really ease you in to playing as the person who just killed Joel. Like, so you despise everybody that's around you, and then they slowly make you despise them less and less, versus showing you their side first and then making you play from their perspective. Or something like that.
Yeah. And again, that comes down to like, look, it's going to be really, really difficult to make a lot of people like this character. But at the same time, it's like, man, that's a gutsy move. And I respect them for like even trying it, because in so many AAA games, they take the easy way out in like every aspect of making a game. But they made telling her story so much harder for themselves by having her kill Joel. And I have to respect them for that. So like, just the pure like guts that it takes to try something like that. I applaud them just for even making an attempt.
Yeah, I think that also plays into the whole review situation, and that we did an entire podcast a few weeks ago about game reviews and journalism, and kind of drew some conclusions from that I think we can apply here. Like, a lot of reviewers approach reviewing games as more as art than as products. And I think that's where a lot of this disconnect between consumers and reviewers is coming from, because I think if you look at this game as art, and which it absolutely is, and you go through it with that mindset of, this is not something I'm here to like consume and just have fun with. It's something I am here to experience and treat it more like a movie, I think, or like not even just a movie, but something you'd see at like a film festival.
Right.
And I think for critics that really works, especially with the mindset that I feel like a lot of critics will have, where they've played a lot of games, they've seen pretty much everything you can do with a game, and this game does a lot of very unique things. and it has a very different approach to, not necessarily to storytelling, but to handling the fact that you're a player and you have and don't have agency at different points in the story. I think that's where a lot of the critical reception comes from, and Naughty Dog is doing some very interesting stuff with what players can and can't do, the actions you have to take versus what you can stop characters from doing.
And the biggest thing too, and we'll get into this more, I think, in our second discussion, but I think the biggest thing they wanted to focus on was playing around with context.
Yeah.
And
absolutely.
like the context of being a player, which I think is so interesting. Okay, I'm gonna stop there.
Yeah. We'll stop there because we're gonna get a lot more into that.
Yeah.
Right.
The one thing I was gonna say is I'm gonna relate to a movie. This entire situation kind of reminds me of the 8th Star Wars movie, the second
Last
one
Jedi.
of the new the second one of the new trilogy, where I feel like I remember watching a video on it. It might have been a MatPat video for all I know, but it was talking about how that movie wasn't as well received by like the general population, because they already had like these like theories and these like they kind of built it up in their head like how they want it. And I feel like Last of Us is also at that kind of level of popularity that it could really, people are brainstorming and bouncing ideas off of each other, and they're not making the idea that is best for the series, but they're making the idea that they want the most. So they're crafting literally the perfect story in their heads, and any deviation from that is immediately going to turn you away. And the first deviation is the fact that Joel dies.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
It's really people built it up in their head for expecting this great masterpiece the way they wanted it, and it's not what they wanted, but it's what they got, kind of.
And I think Naughty Dog definitely knows that, and especially Neil Druckmann, he has been on interviews and everything saying, they knew this game was going to be controversial with audience. I think part of the reason for that is they really did want to make a story that was telling something that would fit the world first and foremost, and that was telling something worthwhile. Like Neil Druckmann's done a few interviews with Troy Baker, who voices Joel, where they talked about the process of coming up with the idea for Last of Us Part 2, and they said there was like a whole span of time where they weren't certain they were going to make another game in The Last of Us because they didn't know if they would ever have an idea that would fit that world and be as impactful as the first game was. And I think that's definitely part of this. Is the first game was a monumental video game. Like it set standards for storytelling, and
the other thing to keep in mind too is that at the time Last of Us was a new IP, and it was also in a genre that was kind of getting stale, right?
It was
like
very stale at that point.
Yeah, 2013, 2014, no one really cared about anything zombie related anymore. So in so many ways it was such like out of left field success, because
they had no marketing because of I remember the marketing of that game being so tough, and like they didn't even market zombies really.
Yeah, no, I remember the only thing that I remember was they had, I think it was like an E3 gameplay demo like a year or two before the game came out. And that was the only thing that I ever saw of it. And I was like, okay, that looks kind of interesting. And then I just didn't hear about it until all of a sudden, it was such a big success. And then I heard about what a fantastic game it was. I hadn't heard of it at all. Like I had completely forgotten what that game was. I was like, what was that one like zombie game that like the one studio was working on? What was that? I completely forgot about it. And then all of a sudden, 10 out of 10s all over the place. And it's interesting now because now that first game, I think the expectations were somewhat low, especially since it was such a different game for Naughty Dog to do. And I feel like the weight of expectations can affect someone's opinion on something so much.
Yeah.
And that's why the leaks really frustrated me, because even with the marketing, they spent so much time trying to like intentionally mislead people into thinking the story was going to be something else, only to have these leaks completely 100% just undermine the effort that went into that.
Yeah.
And in a lot of ways, if you're looking at it like art, it's really ruining. Yeah, it's really ruining the artist's vision and their goals by releasing that, or by reading it.
I think it definitely depends on the person.
And it's so frustrating.
So the playthrough I was watching of part 2, the streamer I was watching had been spoiled to the leaks, and his conclusion after seeing the Joel scene was that it didn't affect his enjoyment of it because the leaks do not present it that way. Like, if you just heard the leak that Joel dies, most people assume that would be the ending. So when it happens as the catalyst for the rest of the game, I think people were still blindsided by it, even if they had heard about it. And I think anyone who is there, like, reading all the leaks probably doesn't care that they're spoiling themselves.
Let's go just ask the broad question. Not affecting sales, because that's a different issue. Do you think that if the leak did not happen, the reputation of this game would be different? We'd be having a different discussion right now.
I think it would be different. I can't say whether it would have been received better or worse, but I definitely think it would have been different. I was just watching a podcast talking about this very thing today, and someone said, I so wish that I could go to an alternate dimension where we were talking about this without the leaks having been a thing, because he so wanted to see what the reaction would have been like without the leaks. And I'm in the exact same boat, because it's such a polarizing game, I feel like, with or without the leaks, and I would just love to see how different things would have turned out.
Yeah.
I feel like that game, Naughty Dog need to kind of trick you into buying this game. And like, I can only imagine if only a company like Naughty Dog could make a game that is no longer passing a threshold of, we need to make a game that like everyone will love so it will sell better, versus we're gonna sell enough, like let's make something that's innovative and new.
Yeah.
And like, we can take a risk here.
I think something to mention there is that this game has broken pretty much every sales record for the PS4.
Which surprised
me. It sold
me.
over 4 million copies near instantly.
That really surprises me, actually.
Yeah, I definitely thought maybe even like Spider-Man would have had a more wide audience, but Last of Us Part 2 has been a massive success commercially. So
I mean, for the first one was like a pretty big success from the start, but it was just a big snowball going down an even bigger hill.
A lot of people discovered it the first time through the remastered edition.
That's how
I've heard. I found out about it. Is I just didn't know about the game, and part of that is because I was pretty young when it came out. I don't think it's a game I would have had an interest in then. But down the line, PS4 comes out, we get the remastered edition, and I keep hearing from people, this game's fantastic, you need to try it. So give it a shot. And like I said this on the podcast we did about Part 1. I was never super into Part 1 for the gameplay. I love the story, but the gameplay the first time I played it didn't really click with me. And I think part of what people in my boat have experienced with Part 2 is that same situation of the gameplay is not really innovating in a way that is unique. It's very much a very refined version of what you would expect from a zombie survival game.
Yeah.
I don't think they're taking any wild leaps.
They added that jump button that has been notorious for doing nothing. And one thing that really got me, because I couldn't, I think the gameplay, I liked the Last of Us 1 gameplay, but I thought it had some improvement to go. The elemental puzzles were great in the Last of Us 1, and really paced, not only stopped it, but they paced it out really well. And it felt really natural, and they actually didn't feel like puzzles. They felt like, oh, I gotta get this done. And this the thing that got me is I remember watching the E3 trailer, and I knew it was scripted from the second I started watching it. But the fluidity of everything that was happening, I was like, okay, they're at least addressing the issues with AI, with the combat not entirely being as fluid as their cutscenes, and not saying they're easy challenges, but I'm like, oh wow, they're really nailing this on the head. And I watched the AI from the actual release, and you'll see a dead body on the ground, and they're like, oh, that sucks, keeps going. And
Yeah.
it's like they kind of tricked me because I thought at least they were putting the thought into it, and it seems like the AI literally from the first one.
Yeah. So I think there's actually the AI issues are part of a larger problem with 2, in that
Mm.
so 2 has one of the best accessibility menus that
Oh
Mm.
I
my
don't even think one of the best. It
God.
is the best accessibility menu available in a game.
Yeah.
Like you can play this game if you're blind. It's that crazy.
Wait, what? Seriously?
Yeah, you can. I'm not blind, so I don't know, but it was said that you can basically get audio cues for everything, and the game you can enable different settings that will allow you to essentially experience the game at some level and complete it without needing certain aspects like the visuals.
And
So
it's great because it's something that can really change the game,
yeah,
like high contrast mode, which only highlights interactable things in the environment, or it's something as subtle as like a slightly more forgiving dodge button. Like
yeah, and I think
big
that's
and
where part of
small.
my problem
Mm.
is that a lot of these options are things that I don't think should just be locked behind like accessibility. They're things I think the game should present to you at some point, like because something I was noticing, the streamer I was watching playing it was playing on survival, which is the hardest difficulty, and a problem he was consistently having is that the enemies weren't too challenging. It wasn't like the AI was tuned well for the difficulty it was at. It was just the game is giving you so many different guns and options to get through combat encounters, but on survival your resource gathering abilities are so low, or you gather a lot of resources but your ammo abilities, like finding ammo, is so rare that he couldn't engage with like a half of the gameplay loop, which was very much bothering him. And something I think that ties into with the AI that we were talking about is the AI has infinite ammo. So you'll get shot at like 40, 50 times in certain scenes in the game, and then you'll go and loot those bodies on higher difficulties and there won't be any loot. You won't get
Yeah.
anything.
Right.
You can tune that in the additional options to make that happen, but it's something I feel like whoever was playing on survival, if they should have gone through and been like, okay, so we're facing an issue here of our gameplay loop is fun, but people are not getting to engage in it. So the difficulty should be tuned a bit more towards like the AI end, maybe make the AI a little more active in hunting you out and more difficult to deal with, but you still get to have the fun aspects of like if you plan well, you can use your guns and do all this cool stuff that you can't normally do in Survivor. So I think the tuning for difficulties is definitely off a little bit.
I think
However, I think we're getting off track a little bit.
I mean,
I
that's
think we
part of
should
the review
be.
challenge thing,
yeah.
though.
Yeah.
I
Well,
mean,
yeah. No,
that's
that's
a whole
fair.
debate too on like should
That's
games
yeah.
even have difficulties because what's the developer's true intention for the person to play at with.
Right.
Yeah, and
So
something I love is these options. So I'm definitely a fan of giving people the option to change these things. It just feels weird to me that the default is tuned in a way that isn't fun for a lot of people. Because I know a lot of people will play the game and they're like hardcore gamers, you know? They're going to play it and they're going to be like, yeah, I can take Survivor. I beat the first game on Grounded. I can do Survivor. And then they'll just be kind of disappointed because it's not that the game is hard, it's artificially hard. Where the
yeah,
difficulty isn't coming from
getting flanked,
yeah,
for
it's not
example.
coming from the ways it should be coming from. And something
Yeah.
that ties into with the E3 stuff we were talking about is around E3 2018 and 2019, like that entire year-long segment, a bunch of the dev team did interviews and they talked about how they were improving the AI, and a lot of those changes are framed in ways that are weird. So
Mm.
a specific example is they were talking about AI basically having an alert state, right? Like they've noticed a dead body or something. So they go into an alert state. And they presented this as if it was this very unique thing.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, like, if you've played most third person shooters, they have that.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like a finite state machine that actually
Yeah, but
branches off
they
many
were
times.
very much selling this as this huge important feature. And I think that was part of the misstep in, I think, selling it as much as they did. They got people overhyped
And then
for
you
that
script
aspect of
that
gameplay.
entire E3 thing to a T
Yeah.
with fluid
It-
animations the entire time.
It's kind of like Apple talking about their new version of iOS every year, which is like, yeah, That's new
Yeah,
to
it's
you
like these
guys.
these are cool features, but I don't. You shouldn't be hyping me up for this kind of thing, right? This should just be something that is part of the game.
We've got a weapon wheel.
You shouldn't be hyping me up for on-screen widgets, Apple.
You know what? I'll definitely get hyped up over accessibility options, though.
Oh yeah, no, definitely. Because I mean that's something. Because like again, it's probably like the most extensive accessibilities menu I've ever seen. And so that's something I kind of wish they had talked about that more, to be honest, because I don't remember them talking about it at all.
They did a big press release about it, and there were a bunch of articles, but they didn't really show it off at any major events.
See, I think that's a shame.
Yeah.
I feel like they really should have.
That would have been something I think, like, instead of talking about improved AI and stuff at E3, I think that would have been a big sell. Obviously, E3 didn't happen this year, and Sony doesn't do it anyway, so didn't really have an opportunity for that. But I would have loved to see at some big event. I guess they have talked about it at like State of Plays and stuff, but State of Play is definitely not as widespread as a lot of the larger events that Sony puts on. So I think that's part of it. People probably expected more from the gameplay than what they got. Whereas I think some people who played The Last of Us 1 and knew what they liked about it and enjoyed it probably got exactly what they wanted.
Yeah.
Which is part of where that big split comes from.
One thing, so because I had mentioned before about how how different what their reactions have been with or without the leaks. Something I've been thinking about too. I've mentioned this to Ryan a couple of times before, but I do think that because it's that big conversation of like, well, did reading the leaks either ruin the game or make the game better or something? I do feel like there's a case of people went into the game pissed off.
Yeah.
And just having that emotion going into a game can so affect your opinion on it. Because I went in, because again, I didn't read any of the leaks or anything, so I went in, but I heard that they weren't well received. So I went in a little bit cautious, but still pretty excited. And I came out of it thinking this game has issues, but I still really liked it for what they presented. Right. But because I've now that I'm actually able to read comment sections again, I would go, I would look at everyone's reactions and look at different reactions online. It seems like anyone who was already pissed off by the leaks, they weren't sold on the rest of the game. Even if they played through it, they weren't sold. And, in all fairness, that just could be because they didn't like the game and that's their opinion. And there's nothing wrong with that. But I definitely feel like there's a subset of people where if they hadn't read the leaks and they hadn't got all pissed off beforehand, their reaction of the overall game when it eventually came out would have been a lot different.
We also haven't even addressed the anti-social justice warrior attack. Like, are we even going to talk about it? Like,
let's spend like 5 minutes on that. So,
okay.
We're not going to get into the cesspool of hatred that is the actual discussion around this. I think a lot of people had reactions to seeing like Abby is jacked. So,
yeah.
Personally, I think that's super cool.
And it's not like they didn't explain why. They did.
Yeah, I mean, they tell it with the environment of when you first play Abby for this. Well, it's the second time you play Abby. It's the start of her story. You're in that WLF compound. They have like a fully functioning gym. They've got a giant cafeteria. They have the stuff you would need to build that kind of weight. So I think people focusing on that as something hugely wrong with the game are kind of just off base. And like I think their priorities are wrong. Like video games have benefits over traditional media because you can do things like portray characters that aren't necessarily fully realistic but still tell a great story. So I think that's where it comes in.
I think
yeah.
Oh, sorry.
And to get on, there are other characters. There is a trans character in the game, and there obviously there was a lot of talk about that as well. My view on it, and I think a lot of people will agree, is my thing is, look, I don't care. I don't care what they are, as long as they're a good character. They fit the story well. I don't care. I really don't.
Going off that, I think one of my fears going into Last of Us 2 was like, is Naughty Dog trying to do it overly? And my fear was not, oh my god, I don't want these represented characters. It's like, oh, they're going to add these characters that have no actual representation and are just labeled and not actually developed and made good characters. But that's not what's happened.
Absolutely not. Like the game itself is very different from that.
Yeah, and honestly, that character Lev was probably my favorite character.
Oh yeah, he's one of my favorites. Absolutely.
Right.
And I think something important to mention here. So Neil Druckmann did an interview, I think, on the Kinda Funny Gamescast a little while ago, and they talked about Lev a little bit. So there was a question there from a Q&A that was asking about was Lev's identity something that the team really wanted to represent, or was it something that like this was a choice that made sense for the character? His answer was along the lines of like, originally we started with sort of the general ideas of these characters, and Lev had to have a reason to get kicked out of the camp. So there needed to be something. And originally it was going to be that Lev like assaulted someone or something, or got assaulted, or just like something minor that didn't make a ton of sense. And then they were talking about it and they were like, we have an opportunity here to make not necessarily a statement, but to represent a character that doesn't like a type of character that doesn't get a lot of representation in a way that I think is really positive and revealing a lot of struggles that they have. So I think in the case of this, it's people are definitely getting mad, and I think it's not that those people are mad about the game legitimately. I think it's that those people are finding small things to kind of rile up their hatred.
Yeah.
To almost like justify being negative about it.
I think very few people have issues like, and a big part of it is that Lev's identity as trans is not a big part of his deal. It's his backstory and for why he got kicked out, but it's not like his defining character trait.
I think PR wise, I feel like they mention those characters a little bit more because and that's how you label it maybe. But then like you play the game, you're like, wow, that's like they made it very clear that's not their identity.
They fit in very naturally.
Not a label. Yeah, it's very natural. Especially The Last of Us 1 with Ellie being gay. Like it fit very naturally into it.
Well, and think about it this way too, with how old Lev and Abby and all these characters are, they probably like they may not even fully understand those like titles even. You know, because if you think about, you know, society and that kind of thing kind of stopped in 2013, and many of these people were born into this apocalypse to begin with. Are those even terms that people would really know or use that much?
Yeah, and Lev brings it up. Lev talks about like he doesn't really understand why he felt the way he did, but he did, and he had to do something about it.
Yeah,
and Yara mentions that too. It's like it's an important backstory bit for the character, and it's a super important identity bit, but it's not the whole identity of that character. Like Lev's purpose is not to be the trans character; it's to be a character, and part of that character is trans.
Yeah. And I think one other thing going off that is like I'm also like a cis straight white male. So I can say that as an ally, I think that's great that they have that character. I don't know if it represents that mindset well.
Yeah.
I can't speak saying I know that, but it seems like if at the very least it was very well intentioned to make a character that like actually is accurately representing that group versus making a character that's labeled that.
Yeah, because I have seen there's some criticism online that has an issue with Lev's identity, in that his entire purpose is to basically make these straight white characters feel better about themselves, or it's their identity is in service to straight white characters, and that's kind of it. And it's not something I necessarily agree with, but again, you know, I'm in Jake's.
Nobody here is the person to make that judgment call.
We're the worst people to have this discussion, actually. I think
it's So I think the people that have legitimate voices in that should be heard are not the people making those comments, which is the important part about this. Like, if I think the problems here are things that people with no right to be like to say their piece on this are kind of controlling the conversation. And it's not a conversation, like even Neil Druckmann says this in the interview. He's like, yeah, this isn't something I've struggled with, but I know people who have, and it's something that is important to them, and we wanted to represent that for them. It's not a thing for like, at least not intentionally on the team's part. And it's a hard topic to talk about because it's a very heated thing, and like people will get angry, and I think a lot of us agree that that shouldn't happen, but it does. So
yeah,
I think that's where we'll cut that discussion off, because I don't want to say anything that is
I think
outside of our
all
bounds.
I think all we can really comment on is whether we liked Lev as a character, just from our perspective, and if he worked well with the story. And in my opinion, Lev was probably my favorite character. I loved that character.
Yeah, they introduced them in a way without adding like everybody has a good and bad side. I feel like Lev has the least bad side, relatively speaking.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So, and also one other thing about Abby's jackedness is we see at the end of the game her after she hasn't had food in a while, and she's not super jacked anymore. So it's not like they didn't think about these things.
And she has a reason, like I think Wyatt said earlier, like there's a reason that she's in this good of shape. She's been fueled by hatred. Like
yeah, I mean her entire life's purpose after Joel killed her father was to hunt down Joel. So she's basically turned her entire character and her entire body into being a means to which to enact revenge and kill Joel. So the fact that she is ripped as hell really fits the character and makes a lot of sense. And then having her captured and having her be starved and having none of that afterwards after killing Joel actually also makes a lot of sense in terms of, you know, she doesn't go down that path anymore. And so visually that also kind of lines up with what's going on in her story as well.
Yeah. All right. So I think we've covered that part of the conversation.
Yeah.
Right.
So something that I think is a pretty big aspect of why people are not, especially users, are kind of jaded with this is that all of the scored reviews pretty much are very positive. Whereas, like we did the game earlier, and there were a few reviews in there that were not super positive. They were all unscored. So I think part of people's public perception of this game is tilted towards the super positive, because most of those reviews that are positive are like 9.5, 10. Whereas a lot of the unscored reviews that take a more in-depth and like talkative look at it are, if not negative, somewhat mixed or leaning towards like the game is great, but there are a lot of caveats to enjoying it that like you need to know going in that this is going to be an uncomfortable experience and it's not going to be for everyone. So I think when people see that like huge wall of 10s, they're like, wow, this is a landmark game. I gotta play this. It's like something that's going to impact everyone. And I think that's a problem.
I think the thing that really annoyed me is like you're literally saying this is comparable to the first one, and I don't think that that's the case for me. And the review, like if they were giving like if it was between 9 and 8, I would be more okay with it. But the fact that I saw how many 10s I saw for this game, it made me like, did half y'all even play the game?
It raises your expectations to
it's like,
what version of the game did you play? I want to play that version.
You can't be critical at all of this game, or like seriously, it has some flaws in it. Like you can't act like it's perfect. I think me and Ryan were talking earlier about how they could have easily talked. They could have like had some more build up for certain events.
It's like this game has pacing issues. It's got very obvious pacing issues.
Yeah.
And there are issues that are easily fixable, which is the big thing that I'm like, I feel like a lot of reviewers just didn't spend the time to think about it after they beat the game. Like what I almost feel like is what happened is they beat the game, they sat down, they wrote the review like immediately afterwards and didn't give it enough time to sit. Which is admittedly like that's part of the review process where you have to have these things in on time. You don't have a lot of time to like sit back and enjoy the game you would normally enjoy it. It's more of a
Yeah.
job than a hobby, as it is for most people. So
Yeah, and that period of letting a game sit and let you think about it, and depending on the game, can really change how you feel about a game. Because man, I remember because Ryan and I we were texting back and forth the entire time we were playing the game, just like thinking like constantly, and then I thought okay the conversation would end after I finished the game, but I sat down and I thought about it for so long, and then Ryan and I our conversation kept going, and I've had such like an emotional roller coaster in terms of not just the story itself, but how I feel about the game.
Yeah, processing it is its own ride.
Yeah, because it's so long. There's so much to think about, and
it's like I think the best way to equate this to people that maybe they're listening, they haven't played the game, or people that have played the game and don't really know how to identify this. My like big identifier is the promotional campaign for Death Stranding. Mirrors how I feel about my emotional response to this game and like all the stuff surrounding it.
Well, and I think part of the reason it's so hard to sum up to is because of how it's structured.
Yeah.
Because there's a very clear like beginning and end to this story, but rather than having like, act 1 be in act 1 and act 2 and act 3, they like, all right, let's kind of do like maybe the end of act 1 at the beginning, and then we're going to put in act 2 3, and then we're going to put like the beginning of act 1 back in at the end, and it's makes it very like difficult to sum up your thoughts, because it can be really difficult to kind of follow that linear story.
You have to
when it's
spend time like flow charting the story together after the game to make sense of it.
Yeah, I mean, perfect example is it was so that one of the first trailers they showed us, which was like that party in the tent and Ellie's kissing Dina, that whole scene, they reference that at the very beginning of the game, and they don't actually show that cutscene until the very end. The placement of it is so strange, and I almost forget that they actually had it in the game, because I convinced myself throughout the entire game that, oh, okay, it's just not in the game. They used it for marketing only. But then it just shows up out of nowhere.
Which honestly would have made more sense than what happened.
Yeah.
Like
it's bizarre.
It's not like that cutscene reveals any information that we didn't already know by that point. Like
the placement of it is so strange.
And also, it's the first marketing. You can assume everybody who's playing.
Yeah, everyone has seen that cutscene. Everyone's seen it. Interested in the game. Yeah, like because that was the E3 reveal. So,
and that's the trailer you show your friends to convince them to buy the game. Like,
yeah. It was like, other than that teaser of just Ellie playing the guitar, it was like our first reaction to it, because it was a trailer that had a substantial amount of story and dialogue in it, and it also had gameplay in it. So it's the thing that everyone immediately attaches themselves to.
It's their first impression.
Because that first teaser, okay, a sequel's being made and Ellie's a little bit older and she can play guitar. Okay, cool. It didn't really tell us much other than a sequel.
Yeah, those are all like logical conclusions from the first game. None of that is new stuff.
And you heard Joel's voice off screen. Like, that's it. And so that first impression is so important. And to have them reference that scene constantly, but then not show it until the end, is such a weird choice. And it makes it so difficult when you're trying to sum up this game, because it feels like a story that isn't being told in the right order. It's bizarre.
And one thing I want to say with this that I think is super weird is that we actually knew that there were going to be two like timeline / playable character, that duality situation. We knew about this in 2018, but not many people like reported on it. It was so that there was an interview. I think it was a Polygon article that was writing about this that I read. Other outlets also did articles on this, but there was an interview and they were like, yeah, we want to tell a story that's going to have two distinct parts that will involve different characters essentially. So I think something weird with that is that, like, I feel like they should have marketed that a little more. Really told us to expect that we weren't only playing Ellie's story, because I think the marketing leads you to believe that you are playing very specifically a story extremely focused on Ellie, and that is not what The Last of Us Part 2 is. That's what about like a third to a half of it is.
I kind of disagree, because I like, again, as someone who was very adverse to leaks and spoilers, I had no idea that you would be playing as Abby, and I had no idea that you'd be spending as much time as you did with Abby. And I kind of liked how that came in.
Well, I don't mean to say like you should tell us that we're going to play Abby. I just think that is like a major gameplay thing that people are setting their expectations up in a way that the game knows it's not going to meet, and it's been revealed that it's not going to meet those because we knew about it. Like this is something we knew about in 2018. But the marketing pushes so hard that it is specifically Ellie's story, and like something we definitely need to touch on is the review embargo for this game, because the review embargo was crazy. And we'll get into that in a little bit, but I think it really set this expectation that people had no clue what they were getting into when they played the game, and to a degree that is harmful to the game. Like I think to some degree hiding stuff helps, but especially on the interviews that Neil Druckmann has done, it comes off as him being very not necessarily controlling, but there's an intended way for you to experience the story of this game. And that intended way is very much how the dev team wants you to experience it. And they kind of want you to feel the emotions at specific moments, which is a lot of like that it's the theory is that's why a lot of these like flashbacks are put at the places they're put at, because they want you to feel specific ways about these characters at specific moments to make other stuff more impactful, which works really well in a setting like a movie. But when you're having to play through that stuff, you cannot control what a player is going to do or think.
Yeah, you can contain spoilers for a movie, and I don't think we're in the world space right now that you could publish a game and not have its entire story, like, because that's what people want to find out is like, what is this game about? If I'm going to spend $70 versus a movie is like, I'll just go to the movie and see if it's from somebody I know and like, and that's just not how games are. So I think
a lot of people went into this being like, I like Ellie, so I'm going to like this game, and that's definitely not the case.
I think that's the issue. Is like they had this like build up, and then they didn't really know how to like hide it from everybody, and then the hiding it made it look like the game was like, is there something wrong with this? Should we be like
it almost made it seem as if they were not proud of what they'd done, or like there's just this weird air of secrecy around
and then started this huge rumor mill about the company's internal workings and like disagreements like
see, as someone who's incredibly adverse to anything, spoilers and leaks and things like that, I personally like the approach of keeping it as secret as possible, but I also understand that it's a very like extreme opinion, and it's not something that everyone feels the same way about. And I get, as you're laying it out, it's like, no, I understand how people feel that way, but I personally really liked being surprised in the way that I was.
A good example of this is
but there's sorry, what?
Yeah, so Metal Gear Solid 2 way back in the day had the same issue where you play as Raiden for most of the game, but you at least have a little while to get used to the fact that you're not playing Snake. Like, you play Snake in the prologue, and then you don't play as him for the rest of it. And people were really mad about that. Like, now they're not, because the game was great, but when it released, there was a ton of outcry. People were mad. And I think this is a similar situation to that, where people expected one thing and got another, and they feel betrayed. Maybe not rightfully so, but it's an expectations thing.
Sure.
Yeah.
It's also they pulled very they did a very similar thing that Avengers Infinity War did, where they would just straight up change cutscenes in marketing, kind of lead you astray. And again, I personally really like this tactic, especially when it's a game that's very much about the story and characters and things like that. But again, it's a very like it's a very extreme,
and for context here, what happened is they model swapped young Joel for old Joel a few times. Like, some of these scenes are actually flashbacks, but the marketing shows them as if they're not, to kind of trick you into thinking that Joel will be around for longer, which I don't have a problem with that. The one specific marketing scene that I think a lot of people have issues with is there's a scene in the game where Jesse shows up, and like there's all this build up, and Jesse's like, hey, I wouldn't let you do this on your own, right? In the marketing, they do that. They show that same shot, the same sequence of shots, and it's Joel standing there, and he delivers that line.
To be honest, the marketing gives across the impression that it's Dina who's going to die, and then Ellie sets off on her own,
which I think is very intentional.
Yeah, no, and I liked that. In the back of my mind, I was like, okay, well then hopefully we spend enough time with Dina to justify Ellie going on this crazy murderous rampage. But the thing is, talking about that scene where it's Jesse, right? I still think they did something really interesting, because you had mentioned to me like that scene is weird because we already know that Joel's dead, and so this whole reveal of sweeping over to Jesse seems weird because we already know it's not Joel. But to me, it's like I still think they did a good job of that, because you're going after Tommy, you're really close to catching up with Tommy at one point during that moment, and so when you pan back, you think it's Tommy, but it's actually Jesse. So I still think that kind of slow pan to Jesse was still a surprise for me.
I don't have an issue with it in the game. It's just it's only the marketing that I think is the issue, because I feel like a lot of people, when they saw the leaks, would cite that trailer as a reason to not believe the leaks. Is like, we're at least going to get Joel for a while, right? When in reality, that trailer was not what's in the game. So I think they took it like one step too far in changing things to make people expect something, because people built up this idea that you could be going on another adventure with Joel, and that is not the case.
Well, okay, but
which isn't necessarily a problem with the game, but it's like it's an interesting marketing choice that I think is definitely going to be very controversial. Well, it has been very controversial.
Yeah.
It's like it's. I would even say it is lying to a certain point, but it's now to the point is lying okay.
Lying,
it's not if they're lying or not. Is it okay that they're lying? Which
it doesn't come across as like cynical or insidious in any way to me. It just comes across as them wanting. Because it definitely just comes across as them wanting to protect their story and people's opinions of it when they actually play it, which is why I'm fine with it, and why I respect them doing that, because it's not insidious in any way. It's not like they're trying to sucker us out of $60 and then give us nothing. No, it's not like that at all. And I feel like people are definitely trying to spin it that way, and that's
definitely not the intention.
That could have fueled kind of that, though, like people having their own expectations for what this game is going to be, and it not being that. This marketing could have contributed to that also.
Yeah, I think my standpoint is that it's super dangerous to set those kind of expectations for your game, because we've seen failures like that. Most often it happens with gameplay, where games like Anthem will set up the trailers will make you expect the game to be one thing, and then the game arrives and it is a very different thing.
Ubisoft are the kings.
Yeah, Ubisoft does that a lot. No Man's Sky had that issue where they really, aside from just overselling the game is not what it was advertised as, right? The advertising set it up to be a very different experience. And I think this is almost like a light version of that, where people that saw that trailer will be like, yeah, I love these characters, I'm definitely going to buy this game, and they're going to play it, and they might be disappointed. They might refund the game. It's stuff like that, which ties into the review scenario. So the review embargo for this game was pretty crazy.
Yeah.
You could not talk about Abby pretty much at all. You could only show scenes from a few different select areas. And like, review embargoes are nothing strange. They exist for every game, pretty much.
And they're somewhat understandable in a lot of situations.
It's just this one was very overdone. And again, Neil Druckmann's done interviews about why the embargo was the way it was, and I think he came off, this is the one moment in that interview where I think I very fundamentally disagree with him, and he was coming off as very almost opposed to reviewers as a concept. Like he was definitely coming off as, we don't trust reviewers to not completely destroy the game in the reviews, or not like destroy it, but destroy the player's enjoyment by spoiling a ton of things. And I definitely get that, but I think they took it too far. Because you can see in reviews a lot of the time the reviewers are just having to dodge around issues, and they can't talk about stuff like the pacing problems because you can't mention most of those scenes. So I think people just don't know how to talk about the issues, and so they don't.
And also, when you just say, I think this game has pacing issues, you can't really specify to what extent and how that truly affects the gameplay.
Yeah, because a review is very much like writing a college essay. If you make a statement, you have to back it up. And if you don't, if you're not allowed to back up, oh, this game has pacing problems. If you can't back that statement up with gameplay and with what you can and can't talk about, then they can't really add it. They can't really have that be part of their review.
Yeah. And like I definitely I get the intention behind not being able to talk about Abby, and I think that's the one part I'm okay with for the most part.
Yeah.
Because there is so much game to talk about without that part of the game that you have a ton to still talk about, and you can avoid talking about the ending and everything. But the fact that they can only show very specific areas, even when like I feel like it's not visual spoilers for a lot of the stuff, to see later game Ellie, like I think
or see the guitar scene.
Yeah, like show us something, right? And it also set up this weird expectation because one of the areas you could talk about, and there are only 3 from my knowledge, 3 broad areas you could talk about. One of them is the open section of the game, the very open exploration bit in Seattle. And that section of the game is very early on, and there is not anything else like it in the rest of the game. So
it very much reeks of, oh, we're gonna have the entire game be this open-ended thing, and then when they realize just how time-consuming it is to make an area like that, they couldn't do that.
It's how time-consuming and how much less control you have. Like it's much harder to trigger those cutscenes that flow naturally with the gameplay.
They actually cut off part of the scene, like in the E3 trailer. They showed that it was more open, and then they cut off some of the areas that showed off were open.
And I because that area shows up once, like an area like that only shows up once, and like what you just said in terms of them cutting off areas, I feel like that kind of ambition in terms of more open-ended game design may have led to a few of the delays that we've seen.
Yeah.
Is because they probably bit off way more than they could chew from a design perspective.
That's what we've been learning. Stay in scope.
Yep. It almost seems like that with a narrative perspective too. Like a lot of these pacing issues just seem like the game is trying to tell too many stories at once, and honestly it might have been better if they cut out some side characters to give more depth to the ones we have. Like I feel like Manny matters very little. But they spend some time with him, and I'm just like, a lot of the time we spend with Manny could have been better devoted to further fleshing out Mel or Owen or Lev or Yara, like the characters that we really care about.
And then that comes down to timing for the cuts too, though. And like I'm just thinking, like if they wanted to restructure, like you're saying, like put the flashbacks in different places, would that change the level you play, the order you play the levels? And then would that change cutscenes that happen in the level? Like there's like so much story stuff that's embedded in the level itself. So I could see how hard, if like you want to make a change later on, you're just like, we can't. Like I could see that happening a lot.
Yeah, because you definitely have things in development, I feel like, where like once they're baked in, it's really difficult to go back and change something,
Which is the exact opposite of a movie, where you have the editing room where you can literally chop stuff up, and you just don't have that option in games.
It's like with a game, if you spend a ton of time developing gameplay mechanics for a character, and then suddenly that character you have to cut from the story, you have now wasted so much money. Because people have like at least 50 people spent a ton of time working on that. So essentially all the work they were doing is then wasted. So you have to really avoid that scenario with game development. And like occasionally it's inevitable that you have to do something like that. Like things happen with this happens a lot with like strategy games where you need to cut a faction or something because the other factions really need the time. And usually that's a good decision to make. Like a good example is Total War. They'll cut out a faction that people expected in the Warhammer games, but the others are then very good. So I feel like this is a situation like that where they probably would have had to make that decision very early on and didn't. So they had to commit to finishing it.
This game seems ripe with potential cuts that should have been made, I think. So that time could have been put in other places. Yep. It seems like there's definitely it needed some of that, like the time need to be put in other places at a lot of places.
But again, though, it feels weird whenever I give criticism to a game like this or any game that has the same problem of it. The issues with the game have nothing to do with a lack of talent or
absolutely.
Completely agree.
It's due to because these people really are trying very hard and they're just doing something really ambitious. And so it feels so strange to me to criticize these people for trying to do the most that they can.
They have no like track to follow right now. They are literally setting their own standard. I completely agree.
Yeah.
So they're falling into the same thing as like Half-Life, I think, where like you literally they don't have a role model. They're the only people doing cinematic like shows like they did, except for like what Telltale. Like they're the only ones that really have that story cutscene gameplay element, and they were really not trying to do the same thing this one. So
Yeah.
And I think too, I do agree somewhat to. I think Naughty Dog really set the standard for like what cinematic movie-esque games look like with very like cinematic cutscenes and things like that. And by the time The Last of Us came out, they were the best, right? But I think that because post Last of Us, you've seen so many games that have done a very similar thing. Like even if you just look at like Sony's if you look at most of Sony's PS4 games, it's gameplay and then these gorgeously animated and gorgeously shot cutscenes. And that's very much, I think, inspired from Naughty Dog's work with Uncharted and The Last of Us. And so I think now there's a lot of games competing in that same kind of arena. And so not only is it a game that has such high expectations now, but it's also a game that has a lot more competition because there's so many other games that are trying to achieve a similar thing.
Yeah. We'll talk more about some of the competition aspects because I want to talk about Days Gone in comparison to this next podcast that we do. Because there are a few things where Days Gone has like the opposite issue, but also fixes some issues that Last of Us 2 has. But yeah, so the broad issue I think the developers have is that they're so incredibly talented and they're driven. They know what they want to do. I don't think they have the perspective that a consumer has of I might only have like 2 hours at the most to play this game in a day. So this like 35 to like 20, I think this game's like 30 to 40 hours ish out on average. And a lot of it is very heavy, impactful scenes. You don't have those moments to just like calm down and consider what you're doing that the first game had. Like the first game had those environmental puzzles and a lot of them that some people didn't like, but they worked really well to break up the pacing. And 2 does away with most of those. You still have some like really cool stuff with like the rope physics and everything, but we don't really have those traditional environmental just like little quiet moments.
It leads into pacing issues, which is
which ties into the pacing issues.
Biggest problem. Anyway, no, I'm going to stay quiet.
Well, the pacing issues are basically going to be the focus of the next podcast because they're a huge part of what's wrong with the game. But at the same time, pacing is one of the most subjective issues a piece of media can have. So it's difficult to really like talk about it in a way that you can't know what the reaction of people is going to be. And that ties back to the developers where they're coming with this perspective. They're like living and breathing The Last of Us for years. Right? So to them, I think the story and the way it's told makes a lot of sense because they know every character point. They know the character arcs. They know their backgrounds. Whereas the player doesn't see that. They are not in those meetings discussing like what would have happened between 1 and 2. They're not there. They don't see that. You have to show it to them in the game somehow. And I think that's where 2 falters a bit. A lot of people have issues with Joel's death scene because it's they say it's out of character for him. And the thing is, it's not necessarily out of character if he had a bunch of character growth in that 4-year period. The issue is that we didn't see any of that growth before he died.
Well, we do. It's just
after
hours
he died.
later.
Yeah, it's like at that moment, we don't have any setup to be like, instead of thinking like, oh no, Joel's in this situation, we'd be like, this character that I know would not have put himself in this situation.
Yeah.
Because they have not showed us what changed.
Yeah, and again, that kind of goes into something that we were talking about earlier, which is people reading the leaks and then they may watch a stream just to see Joel's death, just to like confirm that they hate this game, but then they don't play the rest of the game to see Joel leading up to that scene. And I feel like if a lot of people had stuck around to see that, their opinion might have changed, like yours did, like mine did. Because I really do think those scenes with Joel leading up to that scene, actually the death makes so much more sense. But again, some of these scenes are like one of the very last scenes in the entire
it's like
game.
Joel's death would have hit me so much harder and been so much more impactful if I had known some of this stuff before.
Imagine going into that scene knowing that Joel has slowly and carefully been like he has finally gained some trust in the world.
He's let
and
his
then
walls
his
down.
trust is broken. That
And
would hit so much harder and make so much less anger in this community.
And the one thing that got me that was very confusing is that I think one question that everyone had on their mind going into this sequel is, will Ellie find out what Joel really did? And so you're going through this entire game. It's like, okay, so Joel's dead now. So maybe is Tommy going to tell her? Is like, maybe she'll figure out from the Fireflies. And then at a certain point, you just figure out, oh, she already knew.
Whoops, she already knew.
And then, and then that whole build, you're like, wait, what?
It's like that's a part of the story I really wish had been shown to us in chronological order, because it's so interesting.
I wouldn't even be talking about it if they had shown those flashback scenes. Like I said this to Ryan before, I honestly think the beginning of the game should have been that one scene where Joel and Ellie are picking up guitar strings.
Yeah.
It would have been a tutorial sequence. We would have learned a little bit more. We would have spent more time with the two characters and things like that. And I think just putting that scene at the very beginning, I think would have made Joel's death so much better. And you can do more to make that even better. But just, again, it comes down to the order of events is so.
And I think also the issue is like if you do that, then you're not really easing them into that discussion. So maybe you want to like have some from like some of the later gameplay and then go back. But the thing is, it does that so much. It shows you so many flashbacks.
We get flashbacks within flashbacks. It's
and it's really not consistent. You're getting confused while you're playing it. Like it's so hard to maintain. Oh well, she already knew this the whole time. Did I see that? Kind of kind of seen that from her behavior. It's like it's really hard.
And you know, kind of like what Jake was saying before. It's if we had cut out some time dedicated to characters like Manny and things like that, we could have had more time dedicated to like maybe Tommy and Joel talking about what Joel did at the end of the first game more. And again, it would have led up to that death far better, and it would have kind of eased people into it a lot more. And I think the reaction to Joel's death would have been a lot less. It would have been lessened considerably if we had just been led into it.
Yeah. And I think people would be more feeling the emotions that Naughty Dog intended them to feel, of where we don't understand why Abby did this. We're angry. It's like the audience has had this person ripped from them, but we also didn't have any time to reacquaint ourselves with Joel. Like the game doesn't give you any opportunities to do something like the giraffe moment in the first game, where you just have a conversation with him. We don't get that before he dies. And
you know, I will admit that I really go back and forth on killing Joel immediately, because part of me is like, yes, I wanted more time with him to kind of ease me into this death, but there is another part of me that really likes how it just kind of happens, and there's something that's so matter of fact about it that makes it even more brutal in a way.
Yeah.
There's something, again, it's the kind of thing where it's like I think I see what they were going for in terms of not giving you much time with them and just kind of dropping you into it, because it's very shocking and surprising. And I kind of see where they were going for, what they were going for with that.
I don't know. I think that's also a weird subjective situation. So I had not gotten any leaks before I played it. So I did not know anything about it going in. I expected Joel would die, not because of leaks, but because like Joel's a bad dude.
Yeah.
The first game kind of sets up that he's probably going to die. So
it's
I went in expecting that to be a story beat.
Yeah.
And the thing is, you have this sense of dread the entire time you're playing Abby. As soon as she mentions she's hunting a dude, I'm like, okay, that's Joel. Like, this girl's going to go kill Joel. So I think people that have played the first game recently are not having issues just like learning that. So you're not really hiding what's going to happen. And and they don't give you any time to get back into the groove of like Ellie and Joel being together for you to know what you're missing.
Yeah. And yeah, I couldn't agree. Right now what's coming to my head is like Toy Story 3. Like Toy Story 3 had this nice introduction to this is what you remember this, of course. This is what happened in first and second. Here's what's happened since that. And then it got into like a real scene with like where they are right now. So like at least you had some introduction to the world they've been living in for the last 4 years. And I feel like that wasn't well done here, where you don't have the real proper introduction to this life they've had for the last 4 years.
Yeah. They kind of expect you just to infer that information, which
Mm.
that'll work for some people, but I think for the majority of people, especially people that have played a lot of games or like read a lot of books or just have done different things since playing the first game, that progression won't be immediately visible, and so you need to like show that somehow. That
I do wonder if, because Ryan, you and I played the first game pretty much at the same time. We replayed it to get us ready for the part 2. And I do wonder if my reaction to Joel's death would have been different if I hadn't played it, because I hadn't, up until that point, I hadn't replayed the first game in like a year and a half or something like that. And so I wonder if going right into 2, it would have been way less satisfying for me, because relatively speaking, when I started part 2, I was still pretty fresh off of my first replay. And so going into part 2, I feel like, it's like, okay, I've spent enough time with Joel, so this doesn't feel quite as bad, or it doesn't feel like much is being lost. But for people who maybe played the first game a lot and then just went into the second game without having replayed it like you or I, they probably would have been a lot more disappointed. And I totally understand that.
Yeah, and I think basically what this boils down to is games are very subjective. And I think the big issue with reviews is that a lot of these reviews made it out that this game was objectively a 10 out of 10.
Yeah.
So people went in with expectations that everyone will love this game. Like, this is going to be a game that everyone likes or everyone takes something away from, and that's not the case.
There's also, I feel like one thing a lot of people forget when it comes to reviews is that at the end of the day, reviews are just a collection of someone's very like subjective opinions.
Yeah.
Right. But when you have larger news outlets that are supposed to be a voice for a lot of people wondering whether or not they should buy a game, those voices are then amplified to be like more objective than they really are. Because again, at the end of the day, reviews, there's no such thing as a completely objective review. That does not exist.
I think one thing that these companies could do though is like maybe not have one person's name on this list. Maybe like get the office opinion and see if there is a split among the office.
And that does happen a lot, but usually after the game's been out for a while and people have had time to play it. Yeah, like the best advice for people is generally find a reviewer who your opinions usually align with and follow their stuff.
I mean, here's the thing too. It's just as important to follow people whose opinions you don't really agree with at all.
Yeah, it's like get a lot of opinions, but make sure you know who they're coming from. Because if you tend to disagree with a reviewer and they give a game a 10 out of 10, you're probably like, all right, this might be like an 8 for me. Yeah. Like, I probably won't agree with them. Like, and I think we might have come off as very negative at some points during this, but I think most of us have an opinion of it. Like, The Last of Us Part 2 is a very good game. It's just not a masterpiece in the way that the first game was.
Yeah.
And you're putting it at the same score as that. And I think that was
a lot of people are
that was
one of it as well. Like, I think the first game scored a decent bit lower than this, which is surprising.
That's what got me really mad. It's like unless this is a Terminator 2 situation, like do not call it that, because that does happen. Like Terminator 2, where like a sequel legitimately can be better sometimes.
Empire Strikes Back is another good example.
Yeah, like exactly. Like there's those do exist, so don't mistake them and like give it an honest rating. If everyone's giving it 8 out of 10s, I would have bought it.
Like, if this game had like an 89 on Metacritic instead of a 95, I think it would have been received a lot better.
Yeah, it's just the unrealistic standard that it was set by having those ratings.
Yeah.
And that's the interesting thing too, is that when people have these sky high expectations, is it is it our fault for getting as excited as we were, or is it their fault for not tempering expectations more? I honestly think it comes down to a combination of both.
Yeah, it's absolutely both.
But
I think their marketing didn't help either.
Yeah, and we're overtime already. So
that's what I expected.
we've had a good. This is why we split this into 2 parts. All right, we have not even talked about the story of this game.
I mean, we kind of have to be.
We've talked about the plot points, but we haven't talked about like
there's been no
specifics
subjective talk
at all. So
no, barely any gameplay talk. Too.
Yeah, and I think the gameplay talk is like the thing with gameplay is that gameplay is definitely the most subjective thing about games, because what I like in a game might be what someone else hates. So like for me personally, The Last of Us gameplay is not usually the type of gameplay I enjoy. Like I can still get enjoyment out of it, but it's not the thing that's my jam. But for some people it's their jam.
Yeah, and on the other hand, you have someone like me where I think the gameplay in the first game, and we talked about this in our last Games Club episode, but I think the gameplay in the first game is so, especially when it comes to crafting and materials and everything, is so finely tuned for a very specific style of game that I really enjoy, which is the stealth around a little bit, but then I suck at stealth, so then it just ends in utter chaos and gunshots. It's very specifically tuned for that style of gameplay. So for me, I thought it was great. But again, not everyone is a fan. People just want to completely stealth their way through the game, and that's totally understandable.
Yeah. All right. So I think with that, we're pretty much wrapped up with our discussion of The Last of Us Part 2, Part 1. All right. So thank you to everyone for tuning in and listening to this podcast. This is not a normal episode. You can check out our normal episodes usually on Mondays.
I mean, this was pretty much a normal episode.
Well, I mean, normal episode is in the spoiler-free weekly content, whereas this is a Games Club video or podcast, which is separate.
Yeah, we said no spoilers, right?
Yeah. So the main podcast is spoiler-free, and is a lot more general. We cover a lot of different stuff.
Just title this video like "No Spoilers."
So yeah, you can check that out on Mondays at either the podcast feed or the YouTube page. They both have the same upload times, so you can find that there. This will go up. These videos are not scheduled; they go up whenever they go up. So expect the next part of this podcast, the Last of Us Part 2, likely in the next week. Yeah, that's the podcast thing. You know, if there's topics you want us to talk about, leave a comment or something. We'll see it. I also want to give a special shout out to our Irish audience, because we have a decent portion of our viewership is Irish.
Really?
It is. I thought it was interesting.
Like a noticeable amount.
Yeah, a noticeable. A large percentage is Irish. So
there you go.
Yeah. Shout out to you guys. Yeah, everyone have a nice couple of days, and just don't get angry about video games. Just let your opinions sit, and then talk about them.
Let me say this: getting angry about video games and review bombing them on Metacritic, there are so much better uses of your time.
You could go play a different video game.
Yeah.
Right.
Don't go to a bad restaurant, then leave a bad Yelp review, and be mad about that entire situation.
Yeah.
Right.
It's pointless to get mad over video games, because there's nothing you can do at this point. The game's out. All right. It's not early access. Nothing's changing.
Neil Druckmann has all of your money. Sorry
Neil
to
Druckmann
say.
got your money. He's happy with it.
Yeah.
And you know what? They don't care about you anymore.
And he's
probably not true.
He's going to use those giant wads of cash and beat the shit out of Ellie in the third game. He's going to drown her in a giant Scrooge McDuck vault of money, and there's nothing you can do about it.
See, it's a commentary on social avarice and greed. All right. So thanks for listening, everyone, and we will see you at the next podcast.